as I've already stated, the word income is not defined in the Income Tax Act of 1994. I cannot give the exact definition as requested if it did not exist. Well, that's pretty interesting since that's what they're taxing, and yet they're not going to tell you what it is. Of course, we have the same problem in our country. The word income is not defined in ours either. They're going to tax it, but they're not going to tell you what it is. I would go to the IRS office that has said that you owed money and said, what's the definition of income? And when they say, well, it doesn't exist there, well, I'm going to define it then. I say it's chickens, and I said, I ain't got any, so I don't owe you anything. Now, if you do that, now think about this, if you do that, they're going to have to tell you it's not chickens. But they didn't define it, so how can they tell you it's not chickens? They can't tell you it's not anything if they didn't define it. So they got to define it in order to tell you it's not something. See? But that's just if you want to have fun with them. You might get the same answer this Mr. Clayton did on it. He asked, how, when, and where did I become a taxpayer? The department holds no specific records as to how a person becomes a taxpayer. Now catch that one. They don't have any records to show how anybody becomes one. Get the next sentence. There are no specific documents or forms as such held by the department that states that any person is a taxpayer. And it says accordingly, there are no specific records held by the department that states when a person becomes one. Look, I'm asking exactly the same question, and I want exactly the same answer. This letter with my name on it. All right? Now, how's he not going to give it to you? Because if he gave it to this other guy and he won't give it to you, that's discrimination. There's discrimination laws, you know. They can't discriminate against you. You're asking exactly the same question. You want exactly the same answer. All right? So give it to me. The guy that wrote this is part of the legal department of the IRD. All right? So anyway, ask the question of the IRS. How, when, and where did I become a taxpayer? This is where the money is supposed to go. It says the income tax is imposed, and it says subject to this act there shall be levied and paid for the use of the crown for the year commencing 1st April of each year, a tax in this act referred to as income tax. Okay, now this came as kind of a shock to these New Zealanders because they thought that the income tax was used to build the roads and the hospitals and all this other good stuff, you know, the infrastructure of New Zealand, and instead it's going for the crown, which is over in England, okay? And they said, no, 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 it's used to build the roads and all this other stuff. I said, well, let's do a Freedom of Information Act request and let's see what they say. Because instead of us arguing about it, let's let them tell us, right? And so there was an old boy that did that, and he sent me a copy of it. But here's what he asked for. Please send me certified copies of the documents that evidence that the money collected by the IRD from income tax does not go to the Crown. For your letter, in which you've requested copies of documents that evidence that the money collected by Inland Revenue does not go to the Crown. As the money collected by the Inland Revenue Department from income tax does in fact go to the Crown, I'm unable to provide documentary evidence that it does not. These people are in a state of shock because, yeah, that's where it's going. I said, well, it can't go anywhere else because the law was very specific. See, their original law was 1908, ordinary expenses of His Majesty, you know, the daily expenses. That's what the income tax was originally for. It's never been changed. And so as late as 1994, which was the latest one they had, it still said the same thing, didn't it? Still going to the Crown, okay, because the Queen needs money, all right? So that's where it's going. So instead of doing anything for New Zealand at all, it's going to the Queen. Now this was only after this guy Doug Cameron threatened to sue him if they didn't give it to him. All right? And Freedom of Information Act request, first of all, they told him the same thing that New Zealand just found out. The term income is not defined in their act, so we have no idea what they're taxing. But down here to the second part, it says, with regards to the creation of the Australian Taxation Office, I was able to ascertain that the ATO was created as a branch of the Commonwealth Public Service by an executive instrument in 1973. Well, now we know what document created them, right? Now then, remember, this is written by R.J. Tompkins, who is the lawyer for the ATO. He says, an extensive search of the ATO library and records management system failed to identify any document relevant to this part of your request. Similarly, inquiries to the Commissioner's Office, People and Structures Branch, the Delegations and Authorities Officer, and the Parliamentary Business Unit did not identify any document. And on the advice of the Australian Governor Solicitor's Office, I contacted the Office of the Official Secretary to the Governor General in an attempt to identify and obtain a copy of the executive instrument. This office referred me to the Federal Executive Council, who then suggested I contact the Australian Archives. A detailed search by all offices failed to locate the relevant document. Well, you understand the importance of this. The importance of this is, if they can't find the document that shows they legally exist, see, that's the real relevant part of it. So what Doug did, since this guy says, I can't give it to you, he appealed it. And so the appeals officer wrote him back. And here's what he said. It says in its decision, Mr. Wallace, now Mr. Wallace was actually writing on Mr. Tompkins' behalf on the first letter. Mr. Wallace outlined the extent of his search in attempting to locate this document. I've made my own inquiries along the same lines as the previous one undertaken. I also cannot locate the document. All right? So now the appeals officer can't locate it. So there's two that can't locate it, and they're both from the legal department. You know. And they just happen to have a bankruptcy case going on. Doug gave them these letters, certified them to be true, you know, certified them that they're true as he received them. And they used them in the bankruptcy case. And they said, wait a minute, the ATO is saying that they're a creditor and that this person owes them money, but they can't show they legally exist. And if they can't show they don't legally exist, then they can't be a creditor.